Well, hello there, tribe. Keith Norris here, back again. And I have a very, very special guest, a person whose book I am currently reading right now, which is totally fascinating, especially where we find ourselves now in the middle of this COVID 19 chaos. It makes so much sense to me. Um, my special guest today is Dr. Mario Martinez. Dr. Mario Martinez is a clinical neuropsychologist. He's the author of The Mind-Body Code, which I am reading right now. It's a book I talked about just a second ago. And he is also author of The Mind-Body Self, along with a whole suite of other things that he is super, super active in. Dr. Martinez, thank you very much for coming on today, taking time out of your day to be with us.
My pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Mm. And your work really right now is so, so timely. And I'm reading the Mind Body Code, and it's just like one after another, after another, after another uh, realization of really how intricate our minds and bodies and our culture are all in one, and you can't separate the two. And in Western medicine, we have tried to separate mind and body, and for sure culture, and all of those, and keep them separate. And you state and show very clearly that that's impossible. It is all one unit.
Yes, we can't. And what I'm doing is bringing into science the third component, which is there's very little doubt that mind and body communicate, that cognition affects emotions, emotions affect cognitions, and so forth. But what is missing is the cultural component.
Right.
Things happen, mind and body communicate in a cultural context. And the culture is really the collective beliefs about everything that's important that people share: aesthetics, ethics, wellness, longevity. All these things that are important for survival and meaning is what a culture is. So the brain is a cultural brain. It's not just a brain, a general brain for the universe, or for Earth. But what happens is that the world is, if you see the world as infinite possibilities of interpretations, then what the particular culture does is that it weaves a fabric around the world, and the brain sees the fabric.
Mm.
And one brain from one culture will see one thing, and the other will see something else. So it's not a universal brain; it's a culture brain. And then the immune system has to respond to that brain. So the immune system becomes cultural also. This is why, for example, when somebody is shamed, which is a word, it causes inflammation. It triggers inflammatory molecules as if there's some kind of pathogen out there. So the immune system is biosymbolic.
And can you explain what a culture editor is?
Yes, I had to. All of this came from working with centenarians all over the world, and I had to come up with a theory to explain their success and their health. And I thought initially, trained as a neuropsychologist, kind of reductionistic and looking at the brain and genetics. I was looking for genetic endowment, and after working with many of them all over the world, and also other studies, genes accounts to almost only 20 to 25%. The rest is how we're shaped by the culture.
Right.
And what I call culture editors are the people that a culture gives them power in a particular context to have either placebo, good, or nocebo effect on people. They kind of shape you. That's why I call them editors. And it could be like a doctor in a clinic, or a teacher at school, or a clergy in a temple or church. Those people, we're designed to pay much attention to those people, because in our first 18 years, they basically determine who we are in our survival and our meaning. But then these culture editors could be good or could be bad. And we have to, at some point, break away from the tribe and individuate and find out who we are, rather than who we're told that we are.
And that individuation process can be arduous for some people. I know in myself, it was very rocky for me when I finally started to wake up and go, wait a minute, that stuff that I was told, that's bullshit. I don't agree with that. And it's
and you have to challenge it. And those tribes are very powerful. They don't want you to challenge them.
Right. And that can lead to disease, yes, or can potentiate disease at least.
Yes, very much, because you learn helplessness, and helplessness, it's like, no matter what I do, it's not going to work. If I saw my father, because sometimes they teach you by observation. You could see your father who tried everything and never made it. Right. And even though your father says, look, you can't be like me, what you learn is the observation.
Right.
So you learn that helplessness, that no matter what you do, and that is an ideal condition for immune deficiencies, and to trigger the potential gene expression that you have of illnesses. The other one is family illnesses. They see that as a genetic sentence rather than a propensity for something to be exposed or released based on how you live, the beliefs that you have, and the kind of connections that you have with people. So yeah, it can certainly lead to illnesses.
What's interesting is I was reading your book, and you kind of coming to terms with the cultural editor idea, and understanding that, okay, I can see teachers, organizations, governments, your tribe within a tribe, if you will, your clique, whenever you're growing up, how all of that affects you. But I was watching, Mario, a documentary, and I don't know if you've seen this documentary. It's called Century of the Self. It's like a 4-hour long documentary, but it's the history of propaganda, and it's the history of Edward Bernays and how he created the idea of propaganda, that crowds could be controlled by messaging. And I thought, that is another cultural editor for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a strong cultural editor.
And especially governments, populist governments, that basically tell you that the poor are noble and the wealthy are evil.
Right.
Who would want to come out of being noble and become evil? So they keep you into that dependence. And governments can also be culture editors. So right. These are conditions or people or organizations that have been given power to dictate your identity.
And it's so interesting, because in the work that I've done on myself, so there's a couple things where I see this play out in myself, and I'll just show these or give these as an examples for people to go, oh yeah, I can see that. One example is, I have never prescribed the idea that a 55-year-old, which I'm 55, that a 55-year-old should act, look, and appear a certain way. And I have always said, that's bullshit. I can act, look, and appear any way I want. I don't have to look like a typical American 55-year-old.
I'm glad you brought that up, because this is a very important component, and that you'll see in the book, what I call the cultural portals. We're put into portals based on the culture, not so much on the biology. So you have the portals are infancy, then childhood, adolescent, young adult, middle age, especially, which I'll talk about, and then the elderly. And these are imposed cultural admonitions that keep you within that. And then when you try to fight that, they try to bring you right back up into that portal. So, for example, middle age is a really important portal. By the way, centenarians, people who are over 100 I work with, they don't believe in middle age. I asked one and I said, what is middle age? I asked him and he said, that's a dumb question. You find out when you die. So, they don't go with that middle age. But if you're middle age and you buy into that, let's say that middle age is 40 or 50, or it doesn't matter. At that point, from one day to the other, you become middle aged, and you have to dress middle aged, look middle aged, and get sick like the middle age. And if you fight that and you become an outlier, and you say, look, I think I want to go back to college and finish my degree immediately. Look, you're middle aged now. You have to start saving for your retirement. So when you retire, you have enough money, and you can go then to nursing homes. And it's a very depressing mindset. But that's how it works. When people break away from that, the middle age doesn't exist. That you can. Sometimes I'll wear some shirts that teenagers wear, and people are to ask me, "Do you want to look like a teenager?" And I say, "No, I want teenagers to look like me." So you don't buy into that. And once you do, they admonish you back, and they put you in your place.
Right.
Back to the culture. And you see people who retire, not outliers, but the usual people that retire and then just go in to watch the sunset. They get sick within the first few months, and then they die within 4 to 5 years. And they begin to look old because they dress old, and they start acting old, and they talk old. And all they talk about is their doctor. And I asked a centenarian, when was the last time you went to a doctor? And he said, oh, about 70 years ago, I broke my leg, and I got some help, and it was really good. And then I said, well, what do your doctors have to say about that? And he said, I don't know. They're all dead.
Yes.
So, and I'm not advocating not to go to doctors.
Right.
But we have medicine has become a marketing. A lot of the preventive medicine that's being done is not necessarily preventive, but it's revenue producing.
Right.
So in pharmaceuticals, forget it. I mean, I could talk about that for all day.
Right.
So
Right.
you have to be aware, and centenarians are very aware of their bodies. They become very aware of their bodies. Since many of them live in areas that don't have access to modern medicine and access to clinics and all that, they have to really rely on themselves and get to know themselves well and on the natural kinds of things that they can do. So they become very resilient. And then when they go to the doctor, and the doctor says you have to take this and this and this and this, they'll ask, what is this for? What is this for? What are the side effects? And they'll say, I'll take this and I won't take the rest. And they'll say, no, it's very important because you could die. Don't worry. I won't sue you. That's what they say. So they take responsibility,
Right.
but they don't blame anybody, but they know themselves. Medicine is outstanding. Medicine is just magical in some areas, emergency medicine, infectious diseases,
Right.
and a lot of good things. But you know your phenomenology better than your doctor knows your phenomenology. Your doctor may know your physiology better, how it works, but you know your own experiential phenomenology better. And your body can tell you something is good or not. Of course, you have to really become aware of what you're doing.
Right.
But you don't want to. And unfortunately, in this country, we have an overuse of antibiotics, and I think that makes the immune system weaker. And now with the coronavirus, that's another component there that makes us even weaker than other countries like in Africa and other places that don't have as many
Right.
antibiotics.
Right.
So you have to use antibiotics when you need them. But there are people that take antibiotics as a preventive. It's crazy.
Right. Right. And it just, and we can get in this crowd totally gets that. It just carpet bombs the good gut biota and the bad gut biota, but it carpet bombs everything, and you're left with zilch and have to rebuild. And it's just a
Yes.
vicious cycle once you start going down that. Mariel, I wanted to ask you about a study. I'm thinking back when you were talking about the centenarians that you were working with, but there was a study. I was doing some research on and heroin addicted Vietnam soldiers and that whole era of the quote unquote heroin addicted Vietnam soldiers that were due to come back into the U.S. This was in the early 70s before Saigon fell, and the Nixon administration was worried that they would have returning veterans coming back that were heroin zombies roaming the streets of the U.S. And so there was this big to do about it. Anyway, I was doing research on that, and that had to do with how environment shapes our actions, right? So
Yeah.
the gist of that story was take the soldier out of the environment, bring them into another environment, heroin addiction gone, like magically.
That's right, because in psychology, there's something very interesting. It's called the affordance or the demand characteristics of an environment. And if the environment is overwhelming, you're going to find some ways to detach from the environment or to deal with the environment in a very dysfunctional way. But when you come back, the affordances are different. The demand characteristics are different. So then you drop that and you develop new skills to deal with other things, which is another way of looking that many addictions are not illnesses. They're just dysfunctional socio-cultural kinds of things that go on with a person.
Right. So I was looking at that, and I was compiling information and doing studies. And there was a selfish motive here. My son was going through a heroin addiction withdrawal at that time. So we completely changed his environment, and he's 2 years clean now. It went fine. It was obviously harrowing when we were going through it, but changing the environment was a huge aspect of his recovery, as was what was the pain that you were trying to mitigate with the heroin use.
Yes.
I think it's Gabor Mate says it's not so much about addiction as it is about pain. Find the underlying pain, deal with the pain, and the addiction goes away.
Yes, and I think there are two components. I think in that, and any illness, but addiction especially too, because I've done a lot of work with addictions. Gabor Mate is a good friend. He's a really a good doctor. Gives some good ideas. Is that the illness or the distraction allows you to not do what you don't want to do or what you're afraid of doing. And that's where the lack of meaning. But the other one that's not looked at very often is that an addiction or an illness to a certain degree is something that stops you from doing something good that you don't feel worthy of. So it has to do with worthiness and has to do with avoidances of things that you don't want to do. Both require acceptance of your excellence, and setting limits, not using the illness. So if somebody's fibromyalgic and the spouse says, let's go for a walk. No, I have fibromyalgia. No, I don't want to go for a walk. Because if you use the illness, the brain uses that
Right.
as a way of disconnecting and giving you, and cultures are very, very good at supporting illness. If you say to somebody, I don't want to go for a walk with you. Why not? Oh, I'm going to do some meditation. No, do it some other time. But if you say you're sick, then you get compassion. Oh, that's okay. Can I help you? Can I do anything for you? And the brain is listening. And the brain said, okay, so if I get sick, I don't have to do this. I remember my daughter, when she was about 9, she told me one day, she said, Dad, I don't feel well. I'm going to stay home. I said, sure, it's okay. So she goes to her room to watch television. I said, no. When you're sick, you don't watch television. You stay in bed quietly all day, and then we'll give you some medicine and help you. And about 15 minutes later, she came back. She said, Dad, I'm feeling better. So that's how you learn the secondary gains.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I missed very little school, going to school growing up, but I did go through this period where I was like, other kids don't have to go to school if they're sick. I'm going to try to pull this card, and yeah, my mom was very keen to that, and she's like, well, if you're home, sick doesn't mean you lay in bed. Sick means you're going to be, I've got a lot of chores that I need help with. I went a little bit of that, and I was like, I think
we'll take care of that. That's right.
So yeah, that ended that plain sick thing. The study I was talking about was it had to do with 80-year-olds, and the study looked at if they could remove 80-year-olds from an environment where they were considered, looked upon, treated like 80-year-olds, that they would change their behavior. And so they assembled a group of 80-year-olds, and they had, arthritis, and they had this. They looked like what culture would call a normal 80-year-old.
Yes, that was Ellen Langer.
Yeah.
And what she did was that she basically, that's right. She divided people at 80-year-olds into 2 groups. One group, she told them, come to this place. We're going to be there for a week, and we're just going to reminisce about the things you remember from
right.
when you were younger and all that. The other group, she said, you're going to act as if you were 20 to 30 years younger. You bring a tag with your name of you when you look 20 years, when you were 20 years younger. You're not going to be able to talk about anything beyond a certain age. And when you walk in, it's going to be like a time machine. Yes. Everything is from the back from, it was in the 80s or back from the 50s. Within 6 days, they were doing so well. These people were doing so well that she had to bring in an independent group of people that were evaluating. And she asked them, day 1, there was a photo, and day 6 was a photo. So inverse the photos, and she said, what's the age difference between these people? And they said anywhere from 8 to 10 years.
Wow. That is, when I read that study, it was just incredible.
But the other people got worse because they were reminiscing about things that didn't exist.
Right.
You have to live it as if it's an as if world. Is how it works.
Right. So that was my segue into embodiment. It's not enough just to think these things or to go through these ideas. It has to somehow be embodied. And maybe Dr. Martinez, you can talk about using these 5 different portals, if I remember it right.
Yes.
5 different portals to health, and how you would go in and identify a wound and then treat that wound so that it is embodied.
Yes. What I found in most cultures that I studied is that the tribes have 3 ways of keeping you within in the collectiveness of the tribe, or to not let you become an outlier and individuate. And they can either abandon you, they can shame you, or they can betray you. And each of them has an immunological response. So what I found is that, for example, you have a wound of shame. You were shamed when you were little, or you were shamed when you try to say something that was out of the norm. And that creates then a consciousness that leads to inflammation, because the shaming causes inflammation, molecules of inflammation. And many people who have those shame kinds of illnesses have problems like fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, autoimmune illnesses that are related to the inflammation. I've worked with many, many women with fibromyalgia, and I haven't found one that didn't have some kind of a shaming trauma in their life. So each of them have that, but they also have what I call an antidote. The antidote for shame is honor consciousness. For abandonment is commitment consciousness, and for betrayal is loyalty consciousness to yourself. So if I'll give you an example, if you have a shaming wound, or what I call a damper of becomingness, and you're going to your job and there's a meeting, and you come in and you're late in your meeting, and the person running the meeting is a shaming person, and she says, she or he says, well, there you are. I can always count on you on being late, and they shame you. And you know when you're dealing with a wound, when you over-respond, you're turning red and you're getting angry and all these things are happening. So you stop, you take a deep breath and say, okay, I'm getting shamed now. What is the antidote for shame? Honor. What is the honorable consciousness that I need to live right now? So you stop, and you could say to that person, for example, oh, yes, I'm late and I'll take care of it, but let's talk about this later. And then you have to set a limit. And you go to that person and say, look, I'm late. I'll correct the situation, but don't do this to me. I'm a professional like you, so don't do this to me again. You have to take that assertiveness.
Right.
And that gets you. I'm working now with patients with these kinds of problems like fibromyalgia and so forth, and using honor consciousness as an anti-inflammatory. And it works really well. And then we're going to begin to test at the immunological level to actually see the molecules of inflammation reducing and so forth.
And this is something that you've talked about. I've heard you talk about with Ta and Cole Whitty, who I work with quite a bit as well. That just how pervasive shame is in our culture as a control device. It is, and and until I started working with Ta and Cole, I really didn't notice it so much, but it is everywhere. And I think in right now, in the middle of this COVID-19, there is shame being tossed everywhere.
Very much, which causes that immunological response of inflammation. And inflammation is related to anything from cancer to depression. Almost every illness has an inflammation component. Because again, the immune system is biocultural, and it responds to shame as if there's some pathogen out there. If there's a pathogen, you have to cause inflammation to surround it and protect the rest of the body. But if there's no pathogen, then it's systemic. It goes all over the place. It doesn't know where to go because there's no pathogen. And then that leads to the illnesses that we talked about.
Right. And I think in my own life, and this was the other part that I was going to get to, one of the things that I have been trying to work through in my own life, and my wife Michelle as well, both of us, because we come from the same background, the same socioeconomic situation. And in that situation, the idea was that if you were successful outside of anything other than like entertainment or sports or that kind of way to like break out, that you did so by stealing from somebody else, or you underhanded somebody else. So anybody who was financially successful, like in a business or in an enterprise like that, or entrepreneurship, they were always looked at as a little shady, or a little, they played the system. They figured something out. That's not us. We don't do that. We are honorable, hardworking. And even though I realize that now, and even though I pay honor to that, that's how I was brought up, and maybe that served its purpose for the time. I don't know. But even in knowing all that, I know that I set landmines for myself financially, because
of course it's there. You carry your culture editors on your shoulders,
right?
And it's not an intellectual thing. I had a student with the mentorships that I do, who has a Pilates studio, very successful, but got sick a lot. And we went back and looked at the developmental component of that. And she was told that Pilates is a hobby. You can have it as a hobby, but that's not a real profession.
Right.
The real profession is a doctor or an attorney or whatever. But take it as a hobby, but don't expect to make any money. So she defies the culture editors, and she continues to do well, but gets sick. So it's a way of, okay, if I was told this, then I have to mess it up some way, either by sabotaging it with business or by getting sick.
Right. It's just amazing how all of these things tie together. Now, how can someone? Um, I was looking for a question so in a past interview you did a few years ago, you said that like 75% of successful corporate executives have gastrointestinal issues, which I would imagine is it's tied somewhere around the same kind of thing. There's some kind of a shaming device there, or is that just stress?
Well, it's more because see, stress is an interpretation. There's no such thing as stress. It's an interpretation. So, for example, the research shows that loud noises, crowding, are stressful. But adolescents go to concerts that are very loud and
Right.
very crowded, and they have a great time.
Right.
So, stress is an interpretation. If you and I are talking now, the context is biocognition. A tiger shows up at your door, that's a stressor. Okay. But if we're talking about training tigers, here it is. It's the tiger that we can train.
Right. Right.
It's an interpretation. But what happens with, and I've worked with a lot of Fortune 500 executives and working with them, and that's what they're doing is what I call the urgent present. They're in the urgent present. And the body is made to be able to be on sympathetic system when you're not eating. But when you're eating, it goes to parasympathetic, which slows everything down and speeds up the digestion. It was made that way hundreds of thousands of years. But what they do is they're eating and they're on the phone. So they have sympathetic, parasympathetic, sympathetic, parasympathetic. They have dinner and they're on the phone, or they're watching something from the market or whatever. So that kind of jumping from one to the other is a way of learning gastrointestinal problems.
Mm.
You learn them by doing that.
And I would imagine too, there may be an element of kind of the reverse issue that I had growing up, where they were expected to succeed, right?
Yes.
You're not part of the working class. You are the educated doctor, lawyer, that kind of class.
Yes.
And so you have to perform.
You have to perform. Yes.
And so it's a different kind of shaming.
It is, but it's there. And with what I do with additional work, but I give them a little like a mantra to live by, to embody. And this saying is attributed to Napoleon, but it wasn't Napoleon. It was Cervantes who wrote Don Quixote. Sancho Panza was helping Don Quixote put on his armor to fight the windmills. And Don Quixote says to him, "Dress me slowly, I'm in a hurry." And that's the mantra that you have to take. Right. Because if not only do you have these kinds of problems, but you become very accident prone. So anytime I'm rushing, I'll say, "Dress me slowly, I'm in a hurry." And then I slow down and I start doing things consciously with mindfulness. And then it brings the system back to what it needs to be.
Wow, that's a great mantra. I need to tell that. I need to incorporate that in my own life.
Dress me slowly, I'm in a hurry.
Yeah, that's great. I could keep you on here for hours, Dr. Martinez. Thank you very much for your time. And
my pleasure.
Yes, and yeah, I would love to have you on again. I would love to go down just any one of these rabbit holes that we just kind of flew by, because it is all so fascinating. And the more I read your book, just the more the more I take in, and the more I realize that tight connection between our mind, body, and culture. It's fascinating.
Well, thank you, and congratulations for the good work you do.
Thank you very much.
All right. Enjoyed it.
Yes, sir. Thank you
very
much, Dr. Martinez. I look forward to seeing a lot more from you in the future. And Paleo FX Tribe, we will be back at some point, either later today or tomorrow, with another Facebook Live. So stay tuned. Thank you very much, sir. All right. That was fantastic. I'm telling you, get the book, The Mind Body Code. It is fascinating. You will not regret reading it. Just check out all of Dr. Martinez's stuff. It's super interesting. And somebody asked a question back here. I think I answered it though. The documentary that I was talking about the development of propaganda, and how propaganda kind of got a makeover and got shifted over into PR. And from PR then became branches of marketing. It is a fascinating documentary, and it's I've read a lot about Edward Bernays, who is considered the father of propaganda, the father of modern marketing. It is fabulous. It's long. It's like 4 hours, and it's not the best quality documentary, but the information is fantastic. Be sure to check that out. Go check out Dr. Martinez's stuff. It's all of it is great. I mean, I have jumped down this rabbit hole so deep. It's just been amazing. Anyway, talk to you guys soon. Have a fantastic rest of the day. Bye-bye.